When a joyful wedding celebration was interrupted by a police call, no one expected the shocking truth that would follow. A neighbor, convinced the couple didn't belong, had reported them to the authorities. But as the story unfolds, the couple's identity shocks everyone. Be sure to subscribe and stick around to find out what happened next. The day had dawned brightly on 37th Street, with a hum of excitement and warmth that was hard to miss. Balloons floated gently in shades of soft pink and white, tied to the mailbox of a modest, beautifully decorated home. It wasn't just any ordinary day, it was Priya and Omar's wedding day, and the air seemed to dance with joy. Friends and family had gathered in their front yard, filling it with laughter, music, and colorful decorations. Priya and Omar, a reserved couple who had moved to the neighborhood only 3 months earlier, were finally tying the knot, celebrating a blend of love, culture, and community. But for one resident on the block, this wasn't a celebration at all. From behind her living room window, Mrs. Edna Hargrove, the neighborhood's self-appointed watchdog, peered through her blinds with a critical eye. Edna, an elderly woman known for her sharp opinions and reluctance to embrace change, had kept an eye on all the new families moving in. She'd grown used to keeping the peace by reporting anything she found out of the ordinary, whether it was a car parked in the wrong spot, a stray pet, or even holiday decorations that didn't fit her taste. And today, the gathering next door was unsettling her in a way she couldn't ignore. Through her narrowed gaze, Edna muttered to herself, "They're just blasting that loud music, carrying on like they own the place." She frowned, seeing the guests in vibrant attire, laughing and talking in languages she didn't recognize. In her mind, this wasn't just noise, it was a disturbance. She couldn't understand the way people like Priya and Omar could be so different, so loud, so unsettling. A sense of unease and irritation built up as she continued watching, convinced that this wasn't how things were supposed to be in her neighborhood. Edna's suspicion grew, her mind racing with thoughts about the people next door, strangers in her world, disrupting the familiar quiet she believed she controlled. And with a glance at the phone, she decided it was time to take action. Without another thought, she picked up the receiver, her fingers dialing the police. "Yes, I'd like to report a disturbance," she said sharply, hardly able to mask the disdain in her voice. As she spoke, her gaze remained fixed on the celebration outside, convinced that her call was a necessary step to restore order. Edna Hargrove had never considered herself a villain. In her mind, she was a guardian of the neighborhood, the one who kept an eye out for anything that might disrupt the orderly peace of 37th Street. She watched from her living room window, blinds pulled slightly open, as Priya and Omar's wedding festivities filled the air with sounds of music, laughter, and celebration. To most, it was a scene of joy, but to Edna, it was an intrusion into the quiet, predictable world she clung to. She couldn't understand why this event made her so uncomfortable, but it did. In her mind, everything about it felt foreign, unwelcome, and wrong. As she gazed outside, Edna's frown deepened with each new arrival, each wave of laughter that floated into her home. The guests were dressed in traditional attire, brightly colored, and clearly celebrating something deeply meaningful. But all Edna saw was noise and disorder. This wasn't how things were done in her neighborhood, she thought. To her, the gathering felt like a breach of the unspoken rules she believed all her neighbors should follow. The longer she watched, the more she convinced herself that this event was not just an inconvenience, but a genuine disturbance to the community. "If they don't know how to respect the neighborhood's quiet, they shouldn't be here at all," she muttered, her fingers tapping impatiently on the windowsill. Her mind raced, jumping to conclusions about the guests and even the couple themselves, her own prejudices coloring each observation. She felt an uneasy sense of duty, as if restoring order on 37th Street depended solely on her willingness to act. Unable to contain her frustration, Edna decided she'd had enough. With a quick, purposeful motion, she reached for her landline, an old rotary phone she'd kept for decades. She took a deep breath and dialed the police, feeling the rush of righteousness wash over her as she waited for an answer. Her eyes remained fixed on the scene outside, filled with the sight of Priya and Omar smiling among their loved ones, an image that only fueled her indignation. The phone crackled to life, and Edna's voice was cold and sharp as she spoke, hardly concealing her irritation. "Yes, I'd like to report a disturbance," she said, letting the words hang heavily in the air. The operator asked for clarification, and Edna continued, her tone almost theatrical in its disdain. "It's my neighbors. They have some sort of gathering, a big crowd causing a ruckus next door, and I don't know what's going on, but it can't be legal. There's loud music, cars parked all over the street, and who knows what else." As she spoke, her tone dripped with disdain she made no attempt to hide. To her, it was clear that she was doing the neighborhood a favor by intervening. In her mind, she was standing up for the real neighbors, the ones who followed the rules and shared her sense of what was appropriate. She described the scene in detail, emphasizing anything she found unsettling or unusual, painting a picture for the operator that sounded chaotic, even dangerous, though it was nothing more than a joyful celebration. The operator remained calm, asking a few more questions, but Edna's words continued, building her story with each new detail, each exaggeration meant to underscore her sense of righteous indignation. She felt a twisted sense of satisfaction as she relayed her account, convinced that her actions were justified. She imagined the police arriving and shutting down the event, restoring the quiet order she valued so deeply. When the operator finally confirmed that officers were on their way, Edna hung up with a small, triumphant smile. She looked back out the window, feeling a rush of satisfaction as she saw the wedding guests, unaware of the disruption she'd set in motion. Her heart beat faster as she anticipated the flashing lights and the arrival of the police. In her mind, this was how justice looked, an orderly end to what she saw as chaos. As Edna waited, she watched the flashing lights grow closer, her heart beating faster with each passing moment. She felt a satisfaction she hadn't felt in years, a feeling of having done her duty as she awaited the arrival of the officers who would restore what she saw as peace. In her mind, this was justice, an orderly end to what she perceived as chaos. Finally, the police car pulled to a stop, its lights casting a red and blue glow across the neighborhood. The sight filled her with a smug sense of accomplishment. She had done her part to restore order. Yet she couldn't shake a sliver of unease that maybe, just maybe, she had acted too hastily. But as the officers stepped out of the vehicle, her discomfort was quickly overtaken by self-assurance. This was the right thing to do, she told herself. She'd ensured that her community stayed safe. Little did she know, her assumptions and the scene about to unfold would bring a twist she never expected. The moment the police car pulled up to the curb, a hush fell over the wedding gathering. Guests paused mid-conversation, some exchanging worried glances, others shifting uncomfortably as they noticed the officers stepping out of their car. Priya, the bride, caught sight of the police lights and exchanged a quick, puzzled look with Omar. In her intricately embroidered gown, she seemed like an image out of a fairy tale, yet here she was unexpectedly confronted with a scene more reminiscent of a bad dream. As the two officers approached, Priya and Omar moved forward together, calm yet visibly surprised. Omar held Priya's hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze, his calm demeanor a stark contrast to the tension hanging in the air. The couple had hoped for a day filled with celebration and joy, not a confrontation with law enforcement. Yet, there was no panic in their expressions, just a composed readiness to deal with whatever lay ahead. One of the officers, a young man with a gentle but professional demeanor, spoke up first. "Good afternoon, sir, ma'am," he began, his voice carefully polite. "We received a report of a disturbance here. Do you mind if we ask a few questions?" Priya managed a smile, trying to ease the tension for everyone around them. "Of course, officer," she replied kindly, her voice steady but soft. "We're terribly sorry if we caused any inconvenience. It's just our wedding day, and our friends and family are here to celebrate with us." "We didn't mean for things to get too loud." The officer's eyes softened slightly as he took in the sight of the couple, both dressed in attire that clearly indicated the significance of the day. He glanced around, noticing the peaceful gathering, the colorful decorations, and the guests, all of whom had quieted down and watched with apprehension. It was clear that this was no unruly crowd, but rather a joyous celebration that had been mistaken for something else. The other officer, standing a step behind, scanned the scene with a more reserved expression. His gaze landed on Priya and Omar, and as he looked closer, something seemed to click in his mind. He noticed small badges pinned discreetly beneath their garlands, a detail almost hidden amidst the wedding decor. He exchanged a look with his partner, who had noticed the same thing. A moment of silence passed, and then the first officer cleared his throat, his tone shifting. "Pardon me, are you?" He trailed off, glancing at the badges with a look of recognition. Priya, catching on to the officer's realization, gave a small nod, exchanging a brief, understanding look with Omar. She gently reached up, adjusting her garland to reveal her badge a bit more clearly. "Yes, we're both detectives," Omar replied, his voice calm but with a hint of irony. He flipped open his badge, holding it out for the officers to see, and Priya did the same, revealing her name and credentials with the Metropolitan Police Department. There was a brief pause as the officers took in the revelation, their expressions shifting from formal to slightly embarrassed. The first officer blinked, a bit taken aback. "Detectives?" he repeated, his voice tinged with surprise and an underlying hint of discomfort. The realization dawned on him fully, and he quickly took a step back, his posture shifting to one of respect. Here he was, called out to address a supposed disturbance, only to find that the very individuals at the center of it were law enforcement officers themselves. Priya couldn't help but chuckle softly, her initial surprise giving way to a bemused smile. Omar glanced at her, a spark of humor in his eyes as he took in the surreal turn of events. "Yes," he replied, keeping his tone light but firm. "And we're very sorry if any of our guests disturbed the neighborhood. We didn't intend for it to get out of hand." The second officer, who had been watching with a growing sense of unease, cleared his throat awkwardly. No disturbance here, ma'am, sir," he stammered, suddenly unsure of how to proceed. He turned slightly, shifting his gaze away from Priya and Omar, as if to distance himself from the uncomfortable situation. The two officers exchanged a quick, uncertain look, realizing that their presence here was entirely unnecessary. From the window of her house, Edna watched the exchange with an expression of disbelief. Her satisfaction at seeing the police had quickly faded into confusion as she took in the sight of Priya and Omar holding out their badges, revealing their identities. The realization struck her like a cold wave, sending a shiver down her spine. These weren't just suspicious neighbors, they were law enforcement officers. She had called the police on police detectives. Meanwhile, the wedding guests slowly relaxed, the tension dissipating as they observed the officers' sudden shift in demeanor. Many were aware of Priya and Omar's roles in law enforcement, though few expected it to matter in such a personal moment. Some guests couldn't suppress small smiles or amused glances at the situation, silently noting the irony of the scene unfolding before them. Priya turned back to the officers, her expression softening as she recognized their discomfort. "We understand," she said, her tone gentle. "Thank you for coming out. I know you're just doing your job." The first officer nodded, clearly relieved by her understanding tone. "Of course, detective," he replied, his voice respectful. "We'll be on our way. Apologies for the interruption, and congratulations on your wedding." With that, the officers gave a polite nod to the couple and returned to their vehicle, eager to leave behind the awkwardness of the moment. As the police car drove away, the crowd breathed a collective sigh of relief, and the joyous atmosphere of the wedding began to return. Priya and Omar exchanged a quiet smile, their hands intertwined as they turned back to their guests. What could have been a day overshadowed by misunderstanding had transformed into a moment of unity and resilience, leaving them and their friends with a story to tell, one that would undoubtedly linger in the memories of everyone present. Meanwhile, behind her blinds, Edna shrank away from the window, her heart heavy with a mix of embarrassment and lingering resentment. She'd been so quick to judge, so certain of her assumptions, only to be proven entirely wrong. And though she'd never admit it, she could feel the weight of her mistake settling upon her, a small but significant reminder of the consequences of her own prejudice. Once the police car pulled away, a new energy filled the air. The murmurs among the guests grew louder as word of what had happened spread through the crowd. People shook their heads, chuckled at the irony, and shared incredulous glances. Here were Priya and Omar, two detectives known for their integrity and sense of justice, mistaken as troublemakers on their own wedding day. The misunderstanding was surreal, almost too ironic to believe. A few of Priya and Omar's colleagues, themselves police officers and detectives, couldn't help but find humor in the situation. A fellow detective pulled Omar aside and grinned. "Looks like your day off turned into a day on duty, huh?" Omar laughed, nodding, grateful to be surrounded by people who understood the gravity and irony of the situation. Even with the tension behind them, the day took on a new layer of meaning. It wasn't just about a wedding anymore, it was about overcoming judgment and standing tall in the face of misperceptions. Guests from all backgrounds shared their own stories of feeling out of place or misjudged. One woman, an immigrant who had moved to the country years ago, shared with Priya, "Seeing you handle today with such grace reminds me why I came here, to be among people who believe in respect and kindness." As word spread beyond the immediate gathering, neighbors who'd watched the day unfold from their windows, curious and perhaps a little skeptical, began to see Priya and Omar in a new light. Many of them hadn't known the couple well, having only seen them in passing on their evening walks or while gardening on weekends. Today, though, gave them an unexpected glimpse into the couple's true character. The neighbors, who had perhaps harbored their own quiet doubts or judgments, now felt a newfound respect for Priya and Omar, a respect that stemmed from watching them navigate adversity with grace. One of these neighbors, Tom, a middle-aged man with a reputation for being friendly but reserved, found himself approaching Priya and Omar after the police had left and the crowd began to settle. "I had no idea you two were detectives," he said, his voice sincere and slightly apologetic. "I've been here for years, and I don't think I've ever seen a wedding quite like this. The way you both handled everything today, it's a reminder of what real strength looks like." Priya's face softened, genuinely touched by Tom's words. "Thank you, Tom. It means a lot to us. We're grateful that our friends and family could come together here." She gestured to the decorated yard and the smiling guests, the colors of their attire glowing under the warm afternoon sun. "This celebration is more than we could have hoped for." Tom nodded, looking around as if seeing his own neighborhood with new eyes. "You know, in a way, I think this has brought the whole neighborhood closer. Sometimes it takes something a little unexpected to make people remember what's really important." Meanwhile, other guests continued sharing their reactions, each bringing their unique perspective. Some of the younger family members saw humor in the situation, while older relatives viewed it as an unexpectedly profound moment. Priya's aunt, a woman known in the family for her wisdom, took her niece aside, her voice filled with pride. "Priya, this day will be remembered for much more than just your wedding. You and Omar showed everyone what it means to stand tall in the face of ignorance. Not everyone has that kind of strength, my dear." Priya felt her heart swell with pride, not only in her aunt's words but in the man standing beside her. Omar's calm resilience, his unwavering belief in justice and kindness, had been one of the first things she'd fallen in love with. And today, that strength had become a beacon for everyone present. Priya knew that their love, forged through shared values and mutual respect, had touched everyone who had witnessed the events of the day. As the celebration continued, other neighbors began to trickle in, some curious, some apologetic, all moved in some way by what they'd witnessed. Even those who had initially felt distant or indifferent now viewed the couple in a new light. The wedding had turned into more than a private celebration. It had become a catalyst for understanding, a symbol of the values that make a community strong. This day on 37th Street would be remembered, a day when people looked beyond their assumptions and opened their hearts. From her window, Edna watched in silence. The weight of her actions settled heavily upon her, but she couldn't bring herself to look away. She saw neighbors approaching Priya and Omar, offering their congratulations, some even apologizing for their earlier judgments. She couldn't hear the words, but she could see the warmth and kindness on Priya's face, the patience in Omar's smile as they greeted each well-wisher with grace. For Edna, the sight was a bitter pill to swallow. She had acted out of fear, out of assumptions that had led her astray. Watching the couple she'd wronged receive admiration and respect from the very people she thought she was protecting left her with a gnawing feeling of regret. Deep down, she knew that her biases had clouded her judgment, and the sting of that realization stayed with her as she continued to watch, unnoticed and alone. As the day turned to evening, the neighborhood transformed. Lights flickered on, casting a warm glow over the street, and laughter filled the air as the celebration continued. Priya and Omar, now fully embracing the joy of their wedding day, moved from guest to guest, their smiles bright and genuine. They were no longer just the couple from 3 doors down. They had become part of the neighborhood's story, symbols of resilience and quiet strength that everyone would remember. By the time the last guests began to leave, the mood had shifted completely. What had started as an act of prejudice had turned into a moment of connection, a chance for people to confront their own assumptions and see beyond the surface. Priya and Omar's wedding had transformed from a private celebration into a powerful lesson in empathy and understanding. As the evening drew to a close, Tom approached Priya and Omar once more, a smile on his face. "I think you two have left a lasting impression on all of us," he said, his voice filled with gratitude. "Today reminded me that assumptions can blind us to what really matters. Thank you for showing us that." Priya nodded, her heart full as she took in the kindness and sincerity around her. "It means a lot, Tom. We never expected today to turn into this, but we're grateful it did." Omar added with a chuckle, "And who knows? Maybe this is just the beginning. Maybe our little corner of the world just got a bit brighter today." As they exchanged goodbyes with their guests and neighbors, Priya and Omar knew that the events of their wedding day would continue to ripple through the community. They had begun the day as new residents, but as they looked around at the faces around them, they knew they had become an indelible part of the neighborhood. And in her quiet home, Edna sat alone, reflecting on her choices. The neighborhood she had once felt ownership over had changed in a single day, and she knew, perhaps for the first time, that her views had isolated her. As she gazed into the night, she couldn't shake the feeling that her neighbors, once strangers, had shown her a truth she'd been avoiding for too long. The next morning, as the neighborhood settled back into its usual calm, the memory of Priya and Omar's wedding lingered. The streets were quiet again, but the conversations that had begun during the celebration hadn't ended. Priya and Omar's story had left a mark on 37th Street, sparking reflection, introspection, and a new sense of unity among the neighbors. What had started as a wedding day turned into a day of change, a day when people began to question their own assumptions and consider their place in the community more thoughtfully. Tom, who had been one of the first neighbors to approach Priya and Omar with kind words, found himself thinking about them all day. He had spent the better part of his adult life on 37th Street, living side by side with people he barely knew, going about his routine without much thought. But watching the events unfold at Priya and Omar's wedding had changed something in him. That afternoon, he found himself reflecting on the moments he'd seen them in passing, never realizing the strength and depth they carried. Unable to shake his thoughts, Tom decided to take a small but meaningful step. He walked over to Priya and Omar's house that afternoon with a card and a potted plant, a symbolic gesture of welcome and appreciation. When Omar opened the door, Tom extended his hand and said, "I just wanted to officially welcome you both to the neighborhood. I know yesterday wasn't exactly how anyone expected it to go, but I wanted you to know that I'm glad you're here." Omar smiled warmly, accepting the card and plant. "Thank you, Tom," he said. "It means a lot to us. Yesterday was unexpected, but I think it brought us closer to everyone here." Tom nodded, realizing that Omar's words reflected a deeper truth. He had seen the neighborhood change over the years, but Priya and Omar's arrival felt different. They had not only joined the community but, in a way, they had revitalized it, bringing a warmth and inclusivity that had been missing for some time. As the days passed, other neighbors followed Tom's lead. Some dropped off small gifts, others offered warm greetings when they saw Priya and Omar walking together. It was a subtle but powerful shift, a sign that the wedding day had left an indelible impact. Neighbors who had once only exchanged polite nods or brief hellos found themselves engaging in conversations, connecting in ways they hadn't before. Even those who had been quietly skeptical or distant couldn't help but feel a sense of admiration for Priya and Omar. Their ability to handle the police incident with dignity and composure had resonated with people on a deep level, inspiring a newfound respect. One neighbor, an elderly woman named Mrs. Fletcher, who had rarely engaged with anyone on the street, found herself deeply moved. She had seen her fair share of conflicts and misunderstandings in her life, but she felt a kinship with Priya and Omar, an understanding that transcended age and background. One afternoon, Mrs. Fletcher saw Priya tending to her garden and walked over with a tin of homemade cookies. She hesitated for a moment, then cleared her throat and said, "Priya, I wanted to thank you. The way you and your husband handled things, it was admirable. I'm sorry that the neighborhood didn't make you feel more welcome right from the start." Priya's face softened, and she smiled, touched by the gesture. "Thank you, Mrs. Fletcher. It means a lot to us to know that people care. We're happy to be here and be part of the community." Meanwhile, other families on the block started to reflect on their own assumptions and actions. Priya and Omar's story became a topic of conversation at local gatherings, with parents sharing the story with their children as an example of the importance of kindness and respect. Kids who had seen Priya and Omar as the new neighbors now viewed them with admiration, and many were inspired to introduce themselves, shyly bringing small gifts or homemade cards. The change was subtle but unmistakable. The atmosphere on 37th Street became warmer, more open, as if Priya and Omar's wedding had lifted a veil of distance that had once shrouded the neighborhood. Neighbors who had once been strangers became friends, sharing smiles and stories as they passed each other's homes. The community's newfound unity was a testament to the impact that kindness and resilience could have even in the face of prejudice. Yet, not everyone embraced the change. From her window, Edna observed the evolving atmosphere with a mix of resentment and regret. She could see Priya and Omar's newfound popularity, the small tokens of friendship and welcome that they received, and each gesture felt like a rebuke to her own actions. She watched from the sidelines, feeling the weight of her choices. Her initial satisfaction had long faded, replaced by a quiet bitterness as she realized how isolated she had made herself. In her own home, Edna reflected on the values she'd held for so long, values that had once seemed so right and steadfast. But now, watching her neighbors grow closer, she began to see the flaws in her beliefs, the limitations of her judgments. Priya and Omar's grace had revealed her own rigidity, and for the first time, Edna felt the sting of loneliness in a community she had once claimed to protect. The ripple effect of Priya and Omar's story extended beyond the immediate neighborhood. Local community leaders heard about the wedding, the incident, and the couple's resilience, and soon, Priya and Omar were invited to speak at a neighborhood council meeting. The invitation was both an honor and a surprise, but the couple saw it as an opportunity to share their perspective, to encourage open dialogue about community values and inclusivity. At the meeting, Priya and Omar shared their story, not from a place of anger, but from a place of hope. They spoke about their love for their neighborhood, their desire to belong, and the importance of treating each other with respect and understanding. Their words resonated deeply with everyone in attendance, and by the end of the meeting, a unanimous decision was made to launch a series of neighborhood events focused on building unity and connection. The first of these events was a community barbecue, an informal gathering where everyone was encouraged to bring a dish and meet new people. Priya and Omar attended, of course, warmly greeting everyone who came by. They shared stories with their neighbors, laughed over shared experiences, and deepened the friendships that had begun on their wedding day. As the sun set on the barbecue, Priya and Omar looked around, their hearts full as they saw the connections forming all around them. Children played together, families mingled, and neighbors who had once been strangers shared smiles and laughter. It was a scene they hadn't anticipated, but one they had hoped for, a community that was no longer bound by assumptions, but by genuine bonds. In the months that followed, 37th Street continued to evolve, each new connection strengthening the neighborhood's foundation. Priya and Omar had started the day hoping for a wedding celebration, but what they received was far greater, a community that had come together, united by kindness, resilience, and understanding. And though Edna continued to keep to herself, she could not escape the knowledge that her actions had led to an unexpected outcome. The neighborhood had changed, but so had she. Watching from her window, she felt the first pangs of introspection, wondering if it was too late to seek her own place in this new, more open community. As the weeks passed, the story of Priya and Omar's wedding became a cherished memory on 37th Street, a story the residents shared with friends, family, and even new neighbors who moved in. The wedding had become more than just a celebration, it had transformed into a profound experience, marking a day of learning, growth, and connection. Priya and Omar's quiet resilience became a source of pride for everyone on 37th Street, serving as a reminder of the power of unity and understanding in an ever-evolving world. For Priya and Omar, that day had changed their lives in ways they hadn't anticipated. They often sat together in the evenings, reflecting on the journey that had led them here and the unexpected bonds they had formed. They'd realized, as had many on 37th Street, that a neighborhood was more than a collection of houses. It was a space where shared values, mutual respect, and open hearts could create something beautiful and lasting. And though the day hadn't gone as planned, the challenges they'd faced had ultimately strengthened their connection to this small corner of the world they now called home. One quiet evening, as Priya and Omar sat on their porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon and cast a warm glow over the street, Priya turned to Omar with a thoughtful look. "You know, we could have moved anywhere. But now, I can't imagine us living anywhere else," she said, her voice soft with reflection. "What happened on our wedding day, it changed everything. This place feels like more than just our home, it's a part of us." Omar nodded, taking in the view of the peaceful, familiar street. "I think you're right," he replied. "Life has a way of putting us exactly where we need to be, even if we don't see it right away. I'm grateful for every person we've met here, for every friendship that's grown because of that day. It's like the neighborhood found a new sense of purpose." Their reflections resonated in the hearts of many of their neighbors. Mrs. Fletcher, who had once kept to herself, now looked forward to her weekly chats with Priya, who had become like a granddaughter to her. Tom, who had once viewed his neighbors from a distance, now saw them as friends and found himself happily attending the impromptu gatherings that had become common on 37th Street. Even Edna, who still observed much of the neighborhood from her window, felt a shift within herself. Though she hadn't openly joined the community, she acknowledged that the street had changed in ways she could no longer ignore. One day, as Edna watched from her window, she noticed Priya and Omar planting flowers in their front yard. She felt a familiar pang of isolation, a reminder of the walls she had built around herself. But as she watched the couple, something in her softened, a quiet urge to be part of the world she distanced herself from. The neighborhood had changed, and while she hadn't wanted to admit it, the warmth she saw now on 37th Street tugged at her, filling her with a curiosity she hadn't felt in years. With a deep breath, Edna made a decision. She gathered her courage, picked up a small plant she had been nurturing on her windowsill, and slowly made her way to Priya and Omar's house. As she approached, Priya looked up, surprise and warmth filling her face. One day, as Edna watched from her window, she noticed Priya and Omar planting flowers in their front yard. Edna hesitated, feeling a mix of nerves and relief. I wanted to give you this, she said, holding out the plant. I thought it might make a nice addition to your garden. I know I haven't been the friendliest neighbor, but I'd like to change that, if you'll let me. Omar stepped forward, accepting the plant with a welcoming smile. Thank you, Mrs. Hargrove, he said sincerely. We'd love that. In that simple exchange, a new chapter began for Edna. For her, this small act was a way to bridge the gap she'd created, to reconnect with a community she had once tried to distance herself from. And for Priya and Omar, it was the closing of a circle, a symbol of the transformation that had touched every part of their lives. What had begun as an unexpected challenge on their wedding day had turned into a testament to resilience and forgiveness, a reminder of the power of open hearts. As the neighborhood continued to grow closer, Priya and Omar's story became a lasting reminder of the strength that comes from kindness and understanding. Their wedding had become a celebration of love that extended far beyond them, a story that symbolized the power of unity, the strength of diversity, and the beauty of facing adversity with compassion. They knew that 37th Street would continue to evolve, shaped by the experiences they had shared, the bonds they had built, and the lessons they had learned. For everyone on 37th Street, the couple's story became about more than just one day. It was about the resilience of love, the courage to challenge prejudice, and the quiet strength of kindness. Their wedding day had united a community, and their story would continue to inspire everyone who had witnessed it. In their own way, Priya and Omar had shown 37th Street the beauty of looking beyond assumptions, of welcoming each other with open arms, and of allowing love to create something truly lasting. And as Priya and Omar sat together on their porch, watching the stars twinkle against the night sky, they knew that, no matter what the future held, they would face it with grace, kindness, and the belief that love and understanding would always guide them. Priya and Omar's story is a powerful reminder that the most meaningful connections can come from the most unexpected situations. What began as a simple wedding transformed into a journey of understanding, bringing neighbors together in ways they hadn't imagined. Through their quiet strength and grace, Priya and Omar bridged divides and showed everyone on 37th Street that community is built not on proximity alone but on kindness, open-mindedness, and the courage to challenge one's own assumptions. If there's a lesson to take from Priya and Omar's experience, it's that every interaction we have with those around us shapes our world. In today's fast-paced life, it's easy to forget the power of a simple smile, a helping hand, or a friendly conversation. But as this story shows, even a single day can reshape a neighborhood, transforming it from a collection of strangers into a community built on mutual respect and care. So, as you finish watching, take a moment to think about your own neighbors, friends, and community. What small actions could you take to make someone feel welcome, to bridge a gap, or to reach out to someone who may feel alone? Perhaps it's a friendly hello, a wave, or even a shared story. Those moments may seem small, but they carry the potential to change lives and to create connections that last. Thank you for watching, and if this story resonated with you, don't forget to like this video and share it with others who may need a reminder of the power of community. Subscribe to our channel for more stories that inspire, uplift, and remind us of the values that bring us together. Let's keep spreading kindness, one story at a time.